So here's another thing that I had this thought. So many people are moving to Utah or moving within Utah. And let's say I move into a new home and I'm not super familiar with plants. Okay. Is there an easy way because they're doing their landscape and drawing out trees and shrubs, is there an easy way, or not as an easy way, but a helpful way to tell what might be a new planting that someone planted before they sold the home versus something that's been around for a few years, so they know the difference of watering over the winter?
On trees, generally speaking, I would say it's the appearance of the bark. There are things that are small trees that don't have a very large caliper, but the appearance of the bark can help you determine whether it's new or old. The more mature trees, not necessarily in size, but age, the more mature trees will have a thicker bark. If the bark is very soft and smooth and nicks easily, like if you were to take a fingernail, theoretically, if you were to take a fingernail and scratch it, if it's very tender and it responds to that scratch very easily, then it's clearly a young tree. And that's something that likely hasn't been in the ground for very long. But juvenile bark can last for several seasons. So even if the tree has been in the ground for 3 years, you might still have juvenile bark.
Okay. So I know on here, one of the things we want to share is the watering protocols for newer plantings and watering protocols for established plantings, because there is a difference of what the plant needs, starting kind of as the temperatures cool, what is needed for October for newer, younger plantings versus established plantings.
Right. And so we have talked about it in some other videos. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. But when you have a new planting, the root system is physically small. It's not very extensive. There aren't very many roots that go out into the soil quite yet. And if you imagine those roots acting like a plumbing system and just simply limiting the amount of water and nutrients that a tree can take up, that is a good sort of logic to follow for how often you need to be watering something. Now,
sort of like when you're growing up, it was like, don't flush the toilet while someone's in the shower.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Regan, but basically
for the water flow.
So I'm just gonna make up some numbers for, to try and explain the situation. But say you have a tree that's 10 feet tall and it needs 10 gallons of water a week. That's probably not accurate, but I'm just gonna throw those numbers out there. But that 10 gallons of water is whether it has a root system that's 10 feet wide or a root system that's 2 feet wide. And imagine the 2-foot wide root system having to take up as much water as it needs to support that entire tree. And you're missing out on all of that extra root area. So it makes it such that you have to water more frequently so that the roots that are there don't want for water. They don't desiccate and stress the tree out because water is simply not available. So you need to water newer things more often until they have a chance to send out those roots and create that additional plumbing in order to more easily take up the 10 gallons that tree might need in any given week. So a new planting needs more frequent water, not necessarily large amounts of water, but more frequent water than a planting that's been in for many years. I don't know if that
makes sense.
Did that make sense?
Yes, that made sense.
I hope that made sense.
That made sense. And we do, I will share this information in the class. We do have it on our website. It's also on our warranty pamphlet. We've done a ton of videos about it because it is the most essential thing for any new planting. Is the establishment watering protocol will make or break that tree's root system, shrub's root system, perennial's root system, because the container shape is going to be, all the roots are going to be in a container shape when it's planted. And that growth, it's like going to the gym, you know, it takes a little bit of time before you notice, well, you'll never notice it because it's underground, but before that stretches out and is a really strong system, it just takes time, and it takes, what is it that you said? Was it the roots grow where the water goes? Is that what you, brilliant quote, by the way. But so if you train those roots by putting the water deep and letting it kind of soak out, the roots will seek it over time. But it does take time.
It does. Now, to assign more specific numbers to frequency, meaning like what establishment watering looks like, a perennial might, it's possible that a perennial still needs daily watering even in the fall when we have cooler temperatures, but a tree or a shrub might not need it as frequently as they would if it were the hot part of the summer. So my typical guidelines that I recommend are when we have an air temperature that's roughly 90 degrees or above, you probably ought to be deep soaking your trees and shrubs 2 to 3 times per week. If it's in the 80s or 70s, then twice a week is probably enough. And if it's cooler than that, 50s, 60s, etc., once a week is generally enough. But that is completely dependent on a few different conditions, like your soil in your yard and specifically where that tree or shrub is planted. If you have very sandy soil, you might end up needing to water more frequently than I even just recommended. If you have very clayey soil, if you have a ton of clay, it can hang on to a lot of water. And so you might not need to water as frequently as I was just saying. So we have some guidelines that are printed out that we are happy to share with you. But it really also depends on other conditions like exposure, sun exposure. Things that are in hot sun might need water more frequently than things that are in shade. There are a lot of things to take into account when determining how often you need to water your plantings.
Including in this time of year.
Including this time of year.
Yeah.
Precipitation is another thing, depending on how much rain, or even as we get later into the season, snow, how much rain or snow we get can change how frequently you need to water.
Yeah, so it's a good idea, you know, I think it's a great idea actually to follow, it's a Utah watering guide. They have a weekly watering guide that shows irrigations for lawn, but it also it includes, you know, upcoming precipitation. So it's a great way to say, oh, it's going to rain this week. It might rain. I mean, it will never rain 2 inches in Utah, but, you know, just being aware that you'll have a little bit of rain, but the rain might go this deep in your soil, which is okay for lawn, but it needs to go this deep in your soil for trees, shrubs, perennials. So just being cognizant that you'll have a bit of water, probably still will need to supplement. Hopefully we'll get some rain in October. We're looking like that would be awesome. We could sure use it. So yeah, again, I think that kind of covers watering as a basic structure, but if you have specific questions, just pop them in the comments or the chat anywhere in this group and we will make sure we get them answered for you. So October, okay, we're going to kind of move, that was topic 1 and a little topic 2, but now we're going to move more into, unless there's anything else you want to touch base on for new plantings in October.
I'm sure we'll talk about it more in different stages, either in this conversation or in later classes, but also you need to consider whether or not your tree or shrub is evergreen or deciduous.
Oh, yeah.
That will make a really big difference in how late in the season you need to be watering and the amount of water that's required by that planting. And that does go for existing plantings for your evergreens as well. Evergreen does not just mean conifer. There are conifers that are not evergreen, and there are evergreens that are not conifers. And so making sure you understand what you have can dictate how you need to water it.
That's a really good point. in general, for just, I mean, I know there's no guarantees of anything, but in general for October, would you say that the watering protocol approach for deciduous and evergreens is similar? Like it's the same, like it doesn't
Yes.
really shift until winter, right?
Yes, dormancy.
Dormancy.
As the deciduous trees and shrubs are slowing down through October, as they are entering dormancy, they may not need water as frequently as the evergreens still do, but it's fairly neck and neck in October. They're treated very similarly still in that month, but come later, like early November, etc., into the winter, it definitely can change that. So if we end up having a cool October and your deciduous trees go into dormancy earlier than they do in a typical year, then you might not need to water them as frequently as you would if we stay warm and they stay active until several weeks later. It can make a difference.
Yeah, the weather is, gosh, if we could predict the
I
weather.
know. Yeah, I think we'd all be millionaires if we could
Oh my God.
predict the weather.
Yeah, and yeah, for sure.